They only understood how wrong it was after the aircraft had already stopped moving. From a distance, nothing appeared unusual. The wheels were aligned cleanly with the runway markings. The nose pointed straight ahead. The wings were intact, cutting a familiar silhouette against the pale morning sky. There was no smoke, no fire, no visible damage. It looked like any other arrival during the war. Seconds passed, then minutes. No hatch opened, no crew climbed down. Ground staff waited, assuming a delay, a checklist being finished. A radio call coming any moment now. Someone late unbuckling a harness. Someone still talking. It didn't come. When they finally approached and opened the aircraft door, they were prepared for many things. Injury, exhaustion, even death. They were not prepared for absence. The cockpit seats were empty. Harnesses hung loose, still warm to the touch. The controls were set neatly in place. The radio had not been touched. Navigation maps were still folded, corners creased from repeated use. A checklist lay open, paused halfway through a routine landing procedure. The aircraft had landed perfectly. But the men who flew it were gone. If no one was flying it, how did it land? That question hung in the air long before anyone tried to answer it. Before the runway, before the silence, before the empty cockpit, nothing about the flight suggested it would end this way. In the early 1940s, transport flights like this were routine. They were not heroic. They were not secret. They existed to move things and people efficiently from one place to another. Crews learned to accept monotony as protection. Predictability meant survival. Inside the aircraft, hours were measured by sound and vibration rather than clocks. The steady hum of engines, the faint rattle of loose panels, the occasional adjustment of a dial. Long stretches passed where nothing needed to be said. The men assigned to this flight were experienced, not famous, not reckless. They had flown together before, shared long periods of waiting and fatigue, learned one another's habits in confined space. They trusted each other to notice what mattered. The day began the way it always did, a briefing in a dim room, weather charts pinned to a board, a route traced more from habit than concern. The forecast showed nothing remarkable. Winds were manageable, visibility acceptable. No storms predicted along the way, no warnings written in the margins. The aircraft was inspected carefully, fuel levels confirmed, cargo secured, instruments tested, then tested again. Each action followed a sequence drilled so deeply it barely felt conscious. There was no urgency, no sense that time mattered more than usual. This was not a flight anyone would remember. On the airfield, other crews moved through their own routines. Engines started, engines shut down. Boots crossed the same ground again and again. Orders were shouted, acknowledged, forgotten. When the aircraft taxied out and lifted into the sky, it was just another dark shape climbing into cloud, swallowed by distance and noise. For hours, nothing happened, which in aviation meant everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Radio silence during that phase was expected. Crews checked in at designated points, not constantly. No one watched the clock too closely. No one felt uneasy. Time stretched. The airfield settled back into its rhythm. Other aircraft came and went. Paperwork piled up. Conversations drifted to other concerns. Somewhere above them, the aircraft continued forward. Inside, the cockpit would have been filled with the same familiar sounds. Engine noise, air rushing past metal skin, instruments glowing steadily, hands resting where they always rested. Nothing suggests there was panic. Nothing suggests there was urgency. Then, without warning, the aircraft returned. No radio call preceded it, no request for clearance, no explanation for why it had turned back. It emerged from the cloud already aligned with the runway, descending at a steady angle. Those watching noticed the approach immediately. It was smooth, controlled, almost careful, too careful. There were none of the subtle last-second corrections pilots usually made. No visible adjustments, no hesitation. The descent looked practiced, precise, as if guided by memory rather than reaction. The aircraft touched down cleanly. Tires met the runway without protest. It rolled forward in a straight line. It slowed and stopped. Still, no one climbed out. Ground crews waited again, this time longer. Waiting felt heavier now, uncomfortable. When they approached the aircraft, the silence felt wrong. Not tense, not expectant, empty. Inside, everything remained where it should have been. No blood, no damage, no sign of a struggle. Parachutes still stowed, personal effects untouched. A jacket hung over the back of a seat. A mug sat where it had been left. It was as if the crew had vanished between one moment and the next. The first explanation came quickly, because it had to. Autopilot. Perhaps something had gone wrong mid-flight. Perhaps the crew had been forced to abandon the aircraft, setting it on a stable course before leaving. The idea was comforting. It preserved order. It allowed the story to end neatly. Search efforts began almost immediately. Flight routes were retraced, fields and coastlines scanned, reports gathered from anyone who might have seen parachutes or debris falling from the sky. Nothing was found. No parachutes, no bodies, no wreckage. And the explanation began to strain. Autopilot systems of that era were limited. They could maintain altitude and direction under stable conditions. They could not adapt to changing wind. They could not judge distance or align with a runway. They could not land an aircraft safely. Yet this aircraft had done exactly that. Another explanation followed. Human decision. That something had gone wrong, slowly, quietly. That the crew realized they could not complete the flight and made a choice under pressure. That silence was chosen over panic. This theory explained the lack of a distress call. It explained why everything inside the aircraft was orderly. But it raised new questions. Why leave everything behind? Why abandon the aircraft without communicating? Why leave no trace of where they went? Enemy involvement was considered next. Interception, sabotage, capture. But there were no bullet holes. No forced entry, no damage consistent with a struggle. Enemy records, later examined, showed no engagement. No prisoners matching the crew were ever listed. The aircraft itself offered no answers. Its instruments were functional. Fuel levels were low but sufficient. The radio showed no sign of emergency use. When investigators reconstructed the flight path using available logs and observation points, something unsettling emerged. The deviations were small, not erratic, not panicked, measured, as if someone had been making decisions deliberately, as if the moment to turn back had been chosen. Years passed. The incident was filed away, marked unresolved. One anomaly among many during a war that produced too much loss to examine every absence closely. Families were notified. Not with explanations, but with confirmations. Their sons had not returned. There were no remains to bury, no final messages to hold on to, only an aircraft that came back without them. Over time, the story faded from official attention. Records gathered dust, witnesses aged. The runway continued to be used. The aircraft itself was dismantled, parts reused, its physical presence erased. But the questions remained. At what moment did the crew leave? If they jumped, where did they land? If they were taken, by whom? And if neither explanation fits, at what point does an aircraft stop being a place for people? Today, aircraft still land on that runway. Crews still climb down, stretch their legs, walk away. But once, an aircraft came home alone. And if the plane returned, why didn't they? Stories like this are not meant to be solved. They are meant to linger. If you want to explore more stories like this, stories that end without answers, they are already waiting. quietly.